Okay, I'm gonna click out. We are live, and we have Debbie Irving in the building, y'all. This is the Real Nordic Black. Uh, Welcome to my YouTube channel, the Real Nordic Black. My name is Robert Gillen, or some call me Rob G. As you see on the screen, we have the wonderful Debbie Irving. If you haven't heard of her, she has written the book Waking Up White in 2014. She's a racial justice educator and writer, just as Jane Elliott. It's the same title. I was going to ask you about that title as well. Is if that was, do people usually call them? Well, uh, did people kind of get that cue from Jane Elliott in a way, or when they talk about an educator and not a teacher, or whatnot, because I know she's very adamant on like diversity trainer, or things like
Right.
that. So she said, I'm not a trainer. I don't train horses. I'm an educator or something like that. I remember her saying that. So it probably didn't come from that.
I put so much thought into what to call myself.
Right.
And anti-racist, I think, is what a lot of people would call me now. I
Okay.
I had been a K-1 to kindergarten, first, second grade teacher. And so when you're working with young children, it's always important to tell them what you want them to do as opposed to what you don't want them to do.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking, I'm fighting for racial justice. So I'd rather focus on what I'm fighting for than what
Right.
I'm fighting against. Even though, of course, in order to achieve any kind of racial justice, you have to be anti-racist.
Absolutely.
And the educator piece, yeah, education is my form of activism because that is what finally woke me up.
And that makes sense
Yeah.
to say that too, because I see a lot of I have seen a lot of people call themselves diversity trainer or different things, but when I stumbled across Jane Elliott and the way she explained it, and similarly to how you explain it, it makes a lot better sense to call it an educator. Well, she's a racial justice educator and writer. Uh, she talks about her life. Uh, I don't know if it's like a memoir, your book, right? As well, during your
Yeah.
lifetime, about how you explored everyday systemic racism and use it to educate others. Could you go into, well, when was the time that you woken up? You said you were asleep, and so
Yeah.
was it a gradual wake up, or was it like a more of a sudden thing?
It was sudden.
Yeah.
So I had grown up in this really, insulated white middle class, upper class suburb outside of Boston, Massachusetts.
Yeah.
And then I call it my white bubble, then went to a white bubble college in the Midwest in Ohio. And when I got out, I immediately started working in the arts back in Boston. And one of my jobs was to raise money for after school programs for inner city, underprivileged, under resourced, now all these buzzwords,
Yeah.
and create after school programs. And so for 25 years, either in the position as a school teacher or as a nonprofit manager, fundraiser, programmer, I was always engaged in trying to help and fix and serve communities. And I was on diversity committees. I was going to diversity workshops. And
Okay.
those 25 years, I remained flat in
Mm,
terms of my understanding of what it was I was dealing with.
right.
During those 25 years, I was completely stuck in that white savior
But
mode.
but you still considered yourself a liberal at the time,
Oh,
correct?
I was the best
Absolutely.
person in the world, Robert,
Right.
because I
Right.
was helping and fixing the needy,
Right.
which
Right.
I had no I had no understanding at the time how much of a superiority complex I had been indoctrinated into in my childhood and through all the cultural cues around me, and that I had no idea I could possibly be doing more harm than good. I knew there was an
Uh,
elephant in the room. I just didn't know
right.
me, like
Uh,
my so you
and
asked.
that's a good thing. I'm glad you mentioned that, because we have a lot of white liberals right now probably listening or will listen to this interview here in Norway. It's here is very it's a social democratic society out here. It's some people would say it's like kind of like a utopia, but racism is definitely still prevalent. Systemic racism is still prevalent here in those ways that, as you described, very much so in your book and also in many talks that you do. And I forgot to mention you were a teacher for 25 years. I'm glad you mentioned that in there earlier. You're a classroom teacher for 25 years, community organizer, and I many keynote speaking engagements, TED talks I've seen, and I'm sure I missed out some, but you have a whole bunch of media stuff that people can check out at your website. But yeah, you can go
I
ahead
was
and
actually a classroom teacher for only 4 years because
4 years.
I was just making a transition from being a community
Oh,
organizer,
at the time you're saying.
yeah, nonprofit person. This is all in that 25 years. We haven't even gotten to me waking up yet.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
so I think of that 25 years as a chunk of time where through one job or another, I'm trying desperately to, be a do-gooder, be someone who's on the right side of history.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so I had been a classroom teacher for 4 years. I'd always been involved in schools, but not as a teacher, through someone partnering with schools through the
Okay.
nonprofit angle.
Okay.
And so what happened was, after 4 years of being an assistant teacher, because I didn't have the credentials, I thought, I like this enough that I midlife career change. I'm going to go get my master's. I was 48 years old. I'm going to get my master's in special ed so I can elevate to be a full classroom teacher.
Right.
And so the institution I go to is called Wheelock College. It's here in Boston, Massachusetts, and they have a required first course called Racial and Cultural Identities. And I think, God, I've been working with inner city kids for 25 years. Do I really need this course? That, it's mandatory, so
Right.
I go.
Like
And
most. Yeah.
And I'm thinking, well, I'm going to learn about all those Black and brown kids and the cultures they come from so I can help them better. And
Right.
the first day of class, if you can imagine, like the cartoon sound of like a running cartoon character going,
Right.
like,
Right.
in the
Right.
first 5 minutes of the class, the professor says, so the next 6 months are going to be a deep dive into your own racial and cultural identity.
Okay.
And my thought was, well, what am I going to do? Like, I honestly didn't even know I had a racial or cultural identity.
Good point.
That's how
There's a lot.
far behind the start line I was.
Right.
And so at the end of those 6 months, I had acquired all this new understanding of the way our brains develop. I had learned all this history that I had never learned, American history I'd never learned, despite the fact I was a history major at a really good college.
Right.
And I just couldn't believe what I was being faced with, which was that my country lied to me, my family lied to me, family not intentionally, but they were passing on ignorance that they'd been taught.
Right. So from what you thought was the American dream, really wasn't.
Oh yeah, I totally had bought into the American dream. And
No.
so at the end of 6 months, I felt like, who let me loose in the classroom? Like, the idea that someone like I should be allowed to do any kind of multicultural programs or be involved in diversity without some serious training, it just felt like no wonder we're in the mess we're in. And I could see the collision course that we were on. And I thought, I was so distraught, and my family and friends were like, what did you learn? And I couldn't even begin to articulate, because I'd been drinking from the fire hose for 6 months. And I went looking for that film or that book or something that would replicate the course I'd taken so that my family and friends could start to be with me in these conversations and understandings. And it didn't exist. That's why I wrote the book. That's what the book is meant to do.
Right. That's awesome. No, now you were talking about the level playing field. You have always kind of thought about, what was that you called it, the level playing field, and also the Robin Hood or the white savior syndrome, which most white liberals tend to have. Could you kind of elaborate what you mean by the Robin Hood white savior syndrome and the level playing field natural order?
Yes. And so all those things go together.
Right.
So I was absolutely raised so I'm born in 1960, just to place people in time here.
Right.
So I was raised in an era where, and this is still true, and it was true before this era, but it really was on steroids when I was a kid, was that the United States, as I was being told, was the best country in the whole world because it was the only place where anybody could come, get a fresh start, and you could make it. You're
Right.
fighting for the American dream. We have terms like, use your bootstraps.
Right.
And then
Which we
there's
hear, yeah, which I've heard a lot
yeah,
growing up.
and
Yeah.
think about how that fits with all the other language that we hear in the United States: life, liberty, justice for all, life,
Right.
liberty, pursuit of happiness. It's the land of opportunity, from
Right.
sea to shining sea. It's one nation, indivisible, united. And so I'm getting all these beautiful, talk about utopia, utopian ideas, and I have no reason not to believe them, because in Winchester, which is the name of the suburb, and through all my television shows and my books, I'm again and again being exposed to stories where people come from Ireland, Poland, Russia, France, Germany. They have 2 cents in their pockets. Their parents, their grandparents don't speak a word of English yet.
Right.
They're treated like dirt.
Now, being from the Boston area, I've always heard that the Boston area was pretty racist compared to other areas, especially up north or whatnot.
Yeah, and I will tell you, no matter where I go, whatever city in the United States, people will claim that they're the most racist city in the world.
Right.
Boston has a pretty well-exposed history of racism, particularly around busing in the 1960s.
Right.
But I was completely protected from all of that. We didn't talk about that. There weren't television shows or books about that, and so at least not yet. And so I was able to buy really deeply into the idea, well, if anyone can make it, when I see someone who isn't, it's their own damn fault.
Their own fault.
I know nothing about systems or structures because we're taught that we're all rugged individuals. And so I'm both ascribing not making it to people who aren't living the kind of lifestyle my family is, and I ascribe personal excellence to people who are making it.
Right.
And that fits very neatly. You about to say something?
I was about to mention, yeah, no, go ahead, and then I'll ask you a question.
It fits very neatly with the idea that that white supremacy comes from, is attached to, which is the idea of natural order.
Right.
The idea that, and it comes out of the Enlightenment, that not all human beings are, actually not even all living forms are equal. An ant is below a lion, is below a human.
Right.
And within the humans pile, we're not even all equal. And at the very top of that pile is white, elite, landowning, heterosexual. They didn't have that language back then, but we had the idea. White.
Or like white privilege as well. You talk a lot about white privilege.
Yeah, so that
not in that context, but
so natural order is telling us that there's one kind of a person at the top of that pile.
Yeah.
And then that's Protestant, white, male, land, able, etc.
Heterosexual, Christian, different things. Yeah. But I was about to get into the white privilege part of. You talk a lot about white privilege inside your book, correct? And that wasn't that word term coined by Peggy McIntosh, right?
I'm not sure
through her work, or that's what I've been hearing. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure if she coined it or if she really, really popularized
it. Probably most likely.
And helps people understand what it can look like. With a really seminal essay called "Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack of Privilege."
There you go. Yeah.
About 27 years ago.
Right.
If you look at, though, what I described as a white supremacy construct, which is that the most fit to lead, the most smartest, responsible people are, that white male paradigm.
Right.
Then we have in that, if you are white, you are privileged because white is the superior race. If you're male, you're privileged. If you're Christian, you're privileged. So there are multiple privileges that exist in the construct of white supremacy. And I think what, in my waking up process, like if you had said to me, do men have more privilege than women? I would have said yes.
Yeah.
I said, well, do upper class people have more privilege than working class people? I would have said yes. If you had said, do white people have more privilege than people of color? I would have said, no, we're colorblind. I don't even see color, which
Right.
is another thing I was taught. And so that is why, even though all those things are entangled with one another, for me, the racial piece was just completely missing.
Right. Now you mentioned part of your waking up process as well is when you either ran across a film where they talked about the GI Bill, when that kind of, could you get into that? Was it a film or a lecture or something
Yes,
like that?
it was a film that I often have handy to hold up, but it's called,
Okay.
it's still available today. It's
Right.
as relevant today as ever.
Right.
And you can rent it online. So when I say the name, have a pen and pencil, everybody, and
Right.
write it down.
And
It's,
I'm former military, so I'm a military veteran. I used to be in the Air Force for about six and a half years. So definitely I've heard about that as well in the past. So I like that you brought that up, and also I didn't know that was like a pinnacle. That was a big part of your conversion.
yeah,
Yeah.
if within that 6 months course, there
Yeah.
was one moment that knocked the wind out of me,
Yeah.
it was learning about the GI Bill. So the
Right.
name of the film is Race, the Power of an Illusion.
Race, the power of an illusion.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And they have an incredible website to boot.
Okay.
Rent it. It's so what it is it's a 3-part documentary. Each part is an hour long. It's absolutely brilliant. And
Speaking of documentaries, have you seen the Exterminate the Brutes?
I haven't watched The Force, but I've watched the first 3. Have you?
Okay, yeah, absolutely. I watched the whole thing. It was amazing. It was pretty good. And I also watched another one, which I actually, I don't know if I like that better. Actually, I could see why, a lot more people would like Exterminate All the Brutes, but this one called High on the Hog. It's about yeah, on Netflix. I forgot it's High on the Hog, something about African American cuisine. I forget the title of it. But yeah, just put in High on the Hog in Netflix, and the guy, he goes from, basically he discovers that a lot of foods that are in American foods, a lot of them come from, different countries in Africa in particular. He's focusing on, and he starts in Africa and works his way into to the States and stuff like that. It's real good. That one's another good one.
So I
Yeah,
will definitely watch that.
yeah,
And
yeah.
this is the source. Indian Givers gets into all of the foods that are now seen as American, but
Right. Yeah.
they were native. They're not seen as American. I'm sorry, I have that completely backwards. Foods that we think are like the potato. The potato originated in the United States. It was extracted and
sent out to Europe and stuff. Yeah.
yes, and it's all and all of these foods were brilliantly farmed and cultivated by indigenous Americans, and I mean all of the Americas, north to just what we now call America, and that if not for their hundreds of years of cultivating these foods, those foods would not have made it to societies in Europe and transform those countries, really.
Absolutely. Yeah, because for me, how like on the hog, they talk about okra, because on my mother's side, I come from New Orleans, and so in New Orleans we eat a lot of gumbo and stuff like that. So the okra, I remember when I was younger in the States, I remember asking about okra, talking about okra, fried okra, or something like that. And somebody from one of my continental brothers from Africa, he was like, "Hey, we that where that okra comes from, right?" And and we have it in Ghana in Africa or whatever. And I was like, "For real?" This is way back then. And I looked it up and I was like, "Yeah." And I was like, and I didn't realize how much of a connection that I had at the time to Africa, and as I got to learn more and more. Anyway, so we're gonna go back to that. You had mentioned in the beginning of the book about understanding the whiteness, regardless of class, is key to understanding racism. What did you mean by that? that statement?
Well, I think I certainly have fallen into the trap before waking up of thinking it's about class, not race. And if you don't understand race as a fundamental piece of class design in the United States, we're missing the point. And I think
Right.
the work of Jacqueline Badalora, who I know you've had on,
Right.
and others who really help pinpoint when and why the idea of white as a way to classify a group of people by law.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
point of naming a group of people as
Mm.
white by law
Yeah.
and giving them special privileges
Mm.
was a way to create an elite class, and this other group of white people are supposed to be policing and patrolling and controlling Black and brown people. And that is the purpose of whiteness. And I think, I don't think Jacqueline uses this quote, but I stumbled across it and was sort of blown away. And that's that James Madison, one of our founding fathers, said in the months leading up to the writing of the US Constitution, that the point of this government that we're trying to create here is to protect the minority of the opulent. So we might call that in today's lingo the 1%. It's to protect the minority of the opulent from the majority. And so, as you and listeners and I have learned from Jacqueline Badalora and others who've studied this moment in history, there was this in the early stages of the New World, the United States, there was this need to divide and conquer the masses. Otherwise, how was that powerful opulent of the minority, the elite, the plantation class, how were they going to carry out their wealth accumulation, power accumulation project? The thing I think that's very complicated is that, and I think that the United States is suffering right now, it has always, but we're really seeing it flare right now from an incredible identity crisis, because most of us are taught that we live in a democracy where that field is level. And yet, in truth, our systems and structures have always been designed to create a fierce hierarchy.
Right.
And by creating a racial class of people called white people, that holds in place an underclass, as Dr. Badalora likes to say, of Black and brown people.
Right. Now we see that you have some good books behind you, and that one in particular, The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein, which I flipped to Norwegian. I and me and Jane Elliott had spoke about The Color of Law. I see that they have that color code map. When you talked about the GI Bill was the first major part of realizing that systemic racism definitely exists. Now you're talking about the FHA and the housing laws. Could you get into that a little bit and explain shortly to the audience?
Such a powerful story on a piece of U.S. history. So the map that you're looking at there, it's a map of a city.
Yes.
Not sure which city this is in particular. It looks like it might be Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, but as you can see, it's a city that's been color coded. And the name of this practice is now called redlining.
Correct.
So the way redlining came to be was Franklin Delano Roosevelt becomes president of the United States in the 1930s. He's coming into office just years after the Great Depression has decimated American households financially.
Yeah.
And so he creates the New Deal. That's the name of his program. It's an economic stimulus program. You learned about it, I learned about it, but we didn't learn about it. So the New Deal is this economic stimulus program, and
I definitely didn't know how in depth it was until I read his book. I have to admit, some things I did not know about. I knew about a bunch, but not as much. I didn't realize how designed it was. And the reason why I mentioned that as well is because it was a part of your awakening process. So
right.
that's what we're trying to,
So I learned about the New Deal as this great thing in history, but I didn't learn that it was racially divisive. So it was a great thing for people who look like me.
Yeah.
So the New Deal is this project. Let's put Americans back to work again. And so all these new jobs are created, and the jobs are all around rebuilding and building anew and repairing old infrastructure. So railroad tracks, railway stations, bus stations, government buildings, highways, streets, on-ramps, and a ton of new housing stock.
Right.
But here comes the issue. Here we are in the 1930s. We've got all this new housing, and we've got people who are financially still flattened by the Great Depression. So who's going to be able to pay for this new housing stock? How are we going to bridge that gap? That's the moment in U.S. history where the mortgage gets invented.
Right.
And in order to create the mortgage and manage this whole housing piece, this housing lending piece, the United States government formed two new agencies, the FHA, Federal Housing Authority, and also a home loan corporation. So together, these two agencies have to figure out how to make loans, residential loans, and manage their risk, because that's what lenders do.
Right.
And in doing so, they come up with two primary criteria that lenders, the government when it makes loans, and the private banks when they take the government's recommendations, everyone's going to be considering two primary factors. One is the condition of the building. And that makes perfect sense to me.
Right, right.
All agree it would make sense to not pour money into a home that's in disrepair or about to fall apart. The second condition is the skin color of the residents.
Right.
And the exact language was the presence of even one or two non-white families can undermine real estate values. And so hundreds of cities all over the country, roll out maps, and they engage in this practice called redlining. And the outlined.
See, and when people first hear that, especially white people over here in Norway, say, "How in the hell can the country allow that to happen?" With having that in the legal language, or how in the world were they able to get away with all of that right there?
Well, I think the North and the South had to come to some agreement in the design of the New Deal, and the South had a big voice. And Northerners still took advantage of it. My father. Well, let me jump forward. Because this is important. So World War II happens. This redlining has happened, and just to kind of close the loop on that. So the areas outlined in red, that's where Black folks and often also Jewish folks at the time lived.
Right.
And the red line, there's a key that explains that red line means hazardous. This is lending language, where it's too hazardous to make a loan there. And
coded language.
Yeah, and you're not seeing. There was red, yellow, blue, and green. Green line was where the white people exclusively lived, and that's where you could keep your interest rate super low as a lender.
Right.
And that's where the GI Bill, which comes in the next decade, all these people come home from World War II. The GI Bill is a government benefit package, as you know.
Right.
After World War II, there was a small farm loan, a business loan, free higher education, and this government-backed mortgage. But that mortgage was only good in the green line. So there were some exceptions, but by and far it was available where white people lived.
Right.
A Black or brown GI, and we had more than 2 million Black and brown GIs fighting.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Or two, and they come home and weren't able to access any of the four prongs of that GI Bill. But the housing, the reason they couldn't access that was because of the redlining structure in our housing and lending.
Which I also was a product of. Yeah. The redlining.
So was your family?
My father was my father was. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think you have New Orleans and maybe Oklahoma.
Yeah, man, you are good. We spoke a little bit before we went live. She noticed some conversations I had before, and I'm like, wow, yeah, she's good. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. My father, he was in the army, retired from the army over 20 years. My grandfather also was over 20 years. He retired. He retired in so how it was my mother's born in Fort Sill Army Base. Fort Sill, that's close to Lawton, Oklahoma, southern Oklahoma. That's close to the border of Texas. Yeah. So my father was stationed there. Met my mother. My father's from Mobile, Alabama, but my father's from Guyana, and my mother's father from New Orleans, born and raised. Him and his wife, and he retired there, so he didn't want to go back to New Orleans after he came out the military. So that's how my mom was born there in the same military hospital in Fort Sill, which you heard me in other talk about Fort Sill Apaches. They have a yeah tribe that used to be on that land before the military took over. But yeah, so that's my connection with Oklahoma, and that's why you, as Roxanne Ortiz is from Oklahoma as well. I think she's from Chickasha or I forget what part, maybe something like that. But anyhow, yeah.
Oh, do you know if your family was able to get any benefits from the GI Bill after World War II?
Um, yeah, I'm sure they did, but I'm talking about my immediate family. Even when my father got out the military, when we were looking for housing, in outside of in Lawton, Oklahoma, outside the military base, we had a hard time. We had issues with the realtor, and the undesirable places that she kept on taking us close to the railroads and airports and certain areas. And I recall that definitely that they were trying to lawyer up and take them to court. And there was definitely an incident that resulted in us receiving money when it came to discrimination, racism, when it came to jobs. There was a class action suit that some money ended up going to my mother and our family, and we received certain amount of money, so much so that we were able to purchase a car at the time. And
Hmm.
so it was, you know, so yeah, so definitely if I was to sit back and ask him about he told me so many stories, my grandfather. But yeah, I'm almost certain that something like that had happened because yeah, let's just say when I was in the military coming out, a lot of times well, I have my own opinion about that as well, but a lot of times from what I feel, we weren't always told about the certain benefits that we were able to take advantage of,
Oh,
as
interesting.
much as others as well. So they have their different methods,
Yeah.
as well. Yeah, yeah, for
But when
sure.
so when you
So we're in the refined stage now. So it's but yeah, go ahead.
think about the historical tale
Yeah.
of what
Hmm.
happened in the 1940s,
Yeah.
because $120 billion, and that's in 1940s dollars. So that's about 2 trillion today. Think of that money. It leaves government coffers. It goes into the hands of everyday people just through the housing prong alone of that GI Bill.
Right.
And it goes into home equity. So
Right.
my parents bought a home for $17,000 in Winchester in the
Wow. Yeah.
1940s, right? That was
True.
just the price.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah.
They sold it about 40 years later for $1 million.
And see, the reason why that's significant um, is because that's when you get into like to today, modern times, where they were able to inherit and they were able to invest in that, and the property value, of course, rose, and they were able to then that helped afford to send their kids to college or yeah, yeah. So
Whole,
yeah,
so the idea of it was so long ago. Well, not really, because
right,
that when my parents died, all that money got distributed to my siblings and me. And that
right,
story played out over millions of
yeah.
white Americans. So
Oh,
98%,
not only
90,
Americans, over here in Norway too. It's like that big time. When you talk about having down payments for apartments that they're trying to purchase and things like that. So you have a lot of them that are in that. So it's a global thing for sure.
and I'm really provincial. I just really know
Yeah,
the United States
yeah, 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 yeah.
pandemic. But of course, if anywhere you see uneven outcomes,
Absolutely.
school achievement, health outcomes, housing outcome, wealth accumulation, when
Yeah,
you see predictable patterns
yeah,
along color lines, you know that there's something systemic.
absolutely.
to not to be redundant, but in your systems.
Right.
So I don't know who's doing that work in Norway, but I'm, the story is likely there. And in my
Absolutely.
experience, making that story visible helps people like me and the people in Norway who may still be invested in this utopian idea, and make it if you can. Once we make those systems visible, that's where we can start to change those systems.
Right. Now, we were talking about so the GI Bill, and you went back and cleaned that up there. Then it came to the FHA, and then what was the next thing that kind of got you to the awakening? That I remember I hear that you mentioned that you went to a Robin DiAngelo conference, and then you heard some of the things that she's spoken about. What was it about? She had mentioned something about racism that stuck with you.
Oh, that was years and years and years later.
Right.
I'm happy to talk about that. I think that another really crucial piece of that 6-month period where I was taking that course, that took my breath away, was the Indian boarding school movement that happened in the United States. And most Americans do not know that this has happened. There was just a huge story in Canada, mass graves of, I think it's 215. My husband just said
something recently too there. Yeah, in Canada. Yeah.
Yeah, a mass grave with 215 or 225 children's remains has been found. And when you think about a mass grave, that's multiple people being killed in a short period of time. And so what happened in the United States was that, during this genocide, which I didn't even know there was indigenous genocide. I thought it was all disease. I was taught that smallpox had killed all, and alcohol. I wasn't taught any genocide, and a genocide is still denied by many over here. But of course,
as it kind of leads to one of the videos that I've interviewed, Andre Resendez, he talks about that as well. Yeah.
Right. It fits. I mean, it fits all 5 criteria of now defined as the Geneva Convention has defined as a genocide. But in that campaign of terror, there was a decision to not kill these children, and that there was an age. I may have been 10 or under. Now the question came up, well, what do we do with these children? And there was an idea in the United States, first floated by, my understanding, Richard Pratt. I have a window that keeps popping up that I don't want to look at. And his idea was, if we can get these kids young enough and we can anglicize them and Christianize them, get rid of all their Indianness, that his language was, we can kill the Indian in order to save the man. And so, these Indian boarding schools, in my opinion, were torture centers. These children were taken from everybody, everything they know. They were put on trains. They were transported hundreds of miles to these schools. And, they had everything about them removed. Their hair was cut. Their clothing was removed. Their jewelry was removed. They were given, their name was removed. They were given an Anglo name, and they were given a Bible. They were told to speak in the king's English. And if they spoke their own language, they were severely punished. And that forced assimilation, that was where I really got what deculturalization and forced assimilation means. And here I was supposed to be learning to be a teacher. And unfortunately, I felt like I was seeing some remnants of that kind of thinking, even in the classrooms that these liberal classrooms I'd been a part of. And I started to realize that I also had bought into ideas that be more like me, be whiter, be more Anglo, be more Christian, because that's the best that's the American way to be. And that was really sobering for me, both to know that history and to see some of it in myself. Right.
And then you talked about I want to go to one of your YouTube videos, a couple of them actually, that you actually spoke about, white tears.
I knew that's what you were going to go to. That's
of course. I was gonna wait, but I was gonna talk about because I love how you broke that down there. could we get into that?
Yes.
Yeah.
So you are right. I was at a conference and Robin DiAngelo was speaking,
Yeah.
and I I heard her say, "White women, your tears are a form of bullying."
Mm. That was the quote. That was the quote. Yeah,
And that really, because I'd heard about white tears, white women's tears, and
yeah.
I
Karen.
Karen actually hadn't been born. I mean,
Yeah,
she was
Karen wasn't there yet. Yeah.
she hadn't been christened yet, but
Right.
I had been struggling with, well, what do I do if I feel emotional? Like, is it okay to be emotional? And but then I also understood that white women's tears had been the cause of like the destruction of the Tulsa, Oklahoma.
It's like as you said, incited white because of white tears, they incited racial violence.
Yes,
Like you said, the Emmett Tills, the
yes,
Tulsa, Wall Street, and the what you said, Rosewood, Florida, and
yes.
and 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 nowadays the police brutality.
So
Yeah.
right, so I had when I'm sitting there listening to Robin at that point, I
Yeah.
understood that there were some white women who intentionally weaponized their tears,
Right.
um, and I knew there were feelings, lots of feelings, and I started when she said your tears are a form of bullying. Something hit me,
Mm.
and within seconds, I had a memory that I hadn't thought of for decades. And that was of being about 16 years old and getting my driver's license. And my mother saying to me,
Ah.
if you get
Mm.
stopped by the police, Debbie, just cry.
Mm.
And that's the most explicit lesson I ever got, to use my tears to get out of something.
Right.
And yet I also know that, in relationships, even with my husband in our early years, when I was, it was a long time ago, when we would have a fight, I would, I feel so bad or I feel so misunderstood. I would cry and he'd say, it's okay, let's forget about it. Like it's okay. But what I was doing was getting myself out of having to walk through something challenging.
Right.
So what I love about Robin's work is that she names white fragility as a really powerful weapon.
Right.
And I got it in that moment when she said your white tears are a form of bullying. And
You said you realize how that can trigger others as well.
oh God,
Yeah. Yeah.
yes, it triggers others.
Right.
It derails workshops. And in terms of my own personal growth, it lets me off the hook. I don't have to do any growing. I
Right.
don't really listen to my husband.
There you go.
Bruce, that's my husband's name. Help me understand how that bothered you. I really want to understand the impact I had on you. Let's work through this. And wow, I'm going to own that. I'm really sorry.
Your get out card, as you call it. Yeah.
My get out card, just shed a few tears. And of course, that leads to terrible relationships because you're never working through anything. You're
Right.
just getting out of having to work through stuff.
Right. Right. Now, when it comes to color blindness, how dangerous do you think that is to practice that color blindness?
Well,
When one doesn't want to recognize another person's color, or said love sees no color, or we're all the same, and all these things like that. When one doesn't recognize another person's culture, you also talk about color blindness. How dangerous is that?
well, I think it's a little bit like that Indian boarding school movement.
Yeah.
It's we're not going to see color, just be more like me.
Right.
I would also say, does anybody have any example through history of a problem that's been solved by not talking about it?
Right.
It's a
Because you also mentioned about talking about race, how you used to think that being raised how you were, talking about race was is a rude thing to do, which they also do over here a lot. And a lot of my conversations, Norwegians say, man, almost everything you talk about refers to race at the end of the day. And I said, well, I mean, yeah.
I would have been one of those people. All you ever talk about is race. Like maybe
Right.
if you stop talking about it, it would go away. I
Right.
wouldn't have said those things, but I would have thought them.
Right.
there's a lot going on in terms of the fallout from color blindness. And first of
Right.
all, nobody is colorblind. Of course, we see each other's age, we see each other's race, we see each other's
Right.
height, we see everything about each other.
Right.
Of course, we're taking it all in all the time. Not talking about race has a terrible impact on people of color because there's no ability to acknowledge. If I say, I don't see your blackness, but that's like saying blackness is bad. It's a beautiful thing. Like, I want to know about it. You want to be able to express it. You want to be, fully on, we all should be wanting to be our 100% unapologetic self.
Right.
For white people who claim they want colorblindness, though, there is a terrible fallout, and it's also related to the white tears. Like, if there are these things, it's another get out of hard conversations free card. I don't see color. Well, yes, you do. And by not learning to talk about it, I came out of my childhood. I had no language. I had no concept of what racism even was. I had no understanding that I was playing a role in it. I didn't know how it existed in our history, in my household, in my town. And so,
well, some people think that, well, I'm white. I'm educated. I'm white. I treat people nice. I'm a fair person. Why can't I just look at life as everybody being on a level playing field? And the bootstrap concept. You are what you do, or what you put in. Why do you think that concept is, or do you think that concept is a correct way for a white person to be?
I think
And not recognize the certain things in the system that we call like with the red line, or they have their forms of redlining out here, I tell you, and eminent domains and certain other things as well. But do you think, like I said, the person that's saying, well, I treat people well, so why do I always have to bring out race? Because we're all one race, we're all Homo sapiens, so why do I have to engage in talking about race? Long as I can play my part by just treating everybody equally the same. And yeah, what would you say to those type of people?
I would
or that
say, do
or
we
that
really
mind or that mindset.
that
Uh,
mindset? I do think it's a very dangerous one,
yeah,
because you're deluding yourself that everybody wants to be treated the same.
yeah,
We may all need to be treated a little differently, and we're intelligent people. We think about, if anyone's a parent or a sibling, do you treat every person in your life the same? No, we're adjusting all the time anyway.
right,
And to say that we're colorblind, I'm a good person, I love everybody. We're all human. We bleed the same color on the inside. Like, that's enough. It's actually not enough at all, because it sets you up to reproduce the patterns that are already there. I mean, systems of oppression, Howard Zinn said, you can't be neutral on a moving train. Yeah, systems of oppression are a moving train. They will win every time unless we disrupt and replace with something else. And so, and I also, the whole idea that I treat people the same, you don't know how people want to be treated. And if you're sending out signals that you're not willing to talk about race and racism and think about how it may have shaped your own mindset, then for white people who are doing that, we're sending signals to our Black and brown brothers and sisters. I'm not a safe person.
right. I,
Don't talk to me about this. I'm going to shut you down.
I heard this quote you had said that I liked. I've written it down. It's, if you don't understand the level of discrimination, it's very hard to understand the degree of privilege.
Yes, and that's I think that quote's from me.
Yeah, that's what I said. Yeah, I heard you. I heard you say that. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that was true for
I
me.
should. I was gonna make that a meme earlier today, actually.
Well, feel free to. Learning about the GI Bill is a perfect example. So I think the playing field's level. So the idea of privilege, don't talk to me about privilege. Everyone has the ability to, you want that, go get it.
Right.
So once I learned more about how unequal and unfair the world was, the
Yeah.
more I understood that I was getting a lot of privileges. I wasn't suffering from that discrimination.
Right. Now I see on your website, it was a very nifty website, very useful. I would tell everybody to go to debbieirving.com, and you have like the end of chapter questions
Mhm.
yourself. You have a whole bunch of questions on there. Um, you have the 21-day, all these 21-day challenges and
Mhm.
things like that. So you have you also have tutorials, or you have feedback from people or whatnot that took in those 21-day challenges.
So the 21-day challenge is really important about those. That was the brainchild of my wonderful friend, colleague, mentor, Dr. Eddie Moore Jr.
Okay.
He was a Black man in the United States who founded the White Privilege Conference 22 years ago. Can you imagine?
Okay.
Like nobody
Wow.
would hear the word privilege or white
Right.
5 years,
Right.
20 years ago. Meanwhile, thousands of people attend a year.
Yeah,
And
I heard you've been to that one, right? The you and like a bunch from
yeah,
Tim Wise probably to Gene Elliott, yeah,
yeah,
the whole night, yeah.
have been there.
So
And
I didn't know it was a black guy though that founded that one right there.
yeah,
Yeah.
neither did I till I went there and met him. And I was like, wow, how like
Right.
that was a
Right.
shock for me.
Yeah.
He's an absolutely brilliant human being. And he called me one day. We had started doing some co-facilitating together.
Yeah.
Um, and at the end of our workshops, people are always saying, well, tell me what to do. And he would say, you have to do something every day, 365 days a year. And one day he said, I think that's overwhelming for people. What if we did 21 days?
Mm,
There's he comes out of the sports world. He was a college athlete, and there was that buzz about 21 days is what it takes to make a habit, which isn't necessarily true. But we
right.
thought 21-day curriculum, like who can't do that?
Right.
So he and I developed it, and it lives on my website. But I never want to erase Black brilliance. He is the
Right.
one who came up with the idea, so I want to make sure I put that in there. So these 21-day curriculums are so good. We have our flagship, which covers a lot of different isms. We have one about listening. We have an indigenous one. We have one about the history of protest and rebellion. We
I
have
mean,
one.
you have so many information and resources on your website. So that's why I was like, to find questions to ask you, I was like, man, I was like, yeah, you have almost everything I would want to ask you on your website
Yeah,
already. Yeah,
but I encourage people to check out these challenges. And sometimes people do them alone. Sometimes people
yeah,
do in families or reading groups. But it's taken off in the United States. Like the
yeah. Right.
entire American Bar Association did it just this past year.
Wow, wow.
It's a big deal. It's free. It's online, and all you have to do is do one thing every day for 21 days, and we give you the things to do, like an article, a podcast, a YouTube video.
You do webinars, and you also I don't want to say counsel or engage with companies and individuals as well, correct?
Yes, I do.
Right. Right.
Um, and I didn't do many webinars until COVID hit. I had
Right.
literally had on my little handwritten to-do list on my desk for like 5 years, learn how to do a webinar. And in
Okay.
like one weekend, March 2020, I figured out how to do it because
Got you.
I've been doing everything online.
Because of COVID, that's why I'm doing interviews right now. They might say I need to stop doing interviews after a few of these, but anyhow, I'm gonna keep going for now. But yeah, so I think we kind of, I didn't want to get too much into the book because I still want people to purchase that and check it out. Or is there any? Are you working on anything besides the talks? Are you working on writing anything that you can talk about? You can talk about now that
Yeah,
you're working on
yeah.
in the future.
So I've been
Because
trying.
the book was published originally in January 2014,
Right.
right? So that's been some time now. So yeah.
Yes. So I am working on a next book, and it keeps getting pushed aside because the, the the nature of where we are in the United States right now. People are sort of desperate. All these companies after George Floyd's murder said we're anti-racist, but now they don't really know what that even means. So there's a lot
Mm,
of educating or training.
Critical race theory, is they're talking about that a lot now.
Yes, there's a
Yeah.
lot of there. Yes, we are in a
Right.
very polarized state, and
Oh, I remember I was going to ask you. The Thrive Act. You talked about the Thrive Act. And for those, where is that? Well, for those who don't know about it, it's like a. Can you explain it
so
to
I'm
the
going to
audience?
actually look up to see exactly what the state of it is right now. So
I know it's with the president right now. It's
yeah, it's a congressional act, and this is the idea that people should be able to be thriving,
right.
as just
It,
surviving. It's
isn't it called the HR 23 something? I forget.
yeah, HR 2523.
2523, and it should be with the president right now, waiting for. Yeah.
Massive investment. It's not unlike the New Deal. It's a massive investment in new
Right.
jobs, and looking for housing security, food security for everybody.
Right. And it'll definitely benefit the underprivileged people. Because I was going to segue into reparations. Your thoughts on that?
Yes, like we just have to have reparations.
Right.
If you think about if I smashed into your car, Robert,
Right.
and I said,
Now, should these reparations? No, go ahead.
okay, so I smashed into your car, and I deny it for years and years, and then I say, okay, I hit your car, and then maybe 10 years later, I say, okay, I'm sorry, I hit your car.
Right.
Like until I get you a new car, are we done? Have we repaired? No.
No.
So, and I think that reparations, I used to freak out like, well, it's like logistically impossible. That doesn't matter. Like we can figure out how to get to the moon. If there's the will, we can make reparations. And there's so much. Indigenous reparations need to be made. I mean, there's so many marginalized groups who we need to make reparations, and it's psychological and it's material reparations.
Right.
And it's not ancient history. It's not only connected to slavery, in my opinion. Look at the GI Bill. Look at the distribution of $2 trillion.
Don't you think that reparations for Black people are long overdue, though?
Overdue for everybody.
Yeah, everybody, for sure.
Every year,
Yeah.
every generation that they're not made, the degree of reparations grows.
Right. Now, I like how I read somewhere you said you're into racial. What's the difference between racial equity and racial equality?
So equality is where everybody gets the same thing.
Right.
And that ship has sailed. That never happened. Racial equity is where people get what they need to survive. So I would say that the Thrive Act it's an equity bill, not just racial equity, because it includes white people. It's trying not to exclude anyone in the way the New Deal did exclude people. And so equity means giving people what they need. Like I don't need a house. I have one. I don't need, my girls who are in their 20s don't need an education. They've had it. But equity means giving people what they need to reach the same end. And the same end is to thrive, is to not be caught in a cycle of survival with no access to resources, to educate yourself, be healthy, feed yourself, house yourself and your families.
Right. That sounds good. And so why are you a racial justice educator?
Because I'm fighting for that world I was taught I lived in. I was taught I lived in a free and fair world.
Right.
I'm not willing to let go of that ideal.
Right.
It feels right to me.
And what would you say? What advice would you say to the people that are into this anti-racist work and racial justice work?
Well, I'm in that world, and I would take any advice from them. I think we're all trying to figure it out together.
Right.
I think that the advice is that there's no one right way to be involved, and that we all have to find some combination of our natural interests and talents and skills, and where that intersects with the needs of this moment. And that's going to look really different person to person. people get paralyzed by thinking there's one right way to do it, or get very shouting with each other that you're doing it the wrong way. And I think I'm hoping that we'll all grow a little more into the nuance.
Right.
So many new people, myself included, are in this movement
Right.
because of
Because you have different people, with different opinions when it comes to this anti-racist movement. Some believe when it comes to allyship and things like that. Some people, some black people believe that they shouldn't teach any white people about racism at all. That's not their duty to do that. And then there's some people feel that it is their duty. And then there's some people that believe that white people should teach white people um, about racism. And then there's yeah. So it's a whole mix up of different approaches and different things. And so
there's some people of color, not
yeah,
just black people, but people of color who believe that white people are so addicted to our own whiteness and we are so completely untrustworthy that we have no place in this movement at all.
yeah,
And I take that really seriously. I mean, that puts
yeah,
pressure on anyone who's white who's in this work, especially it's kind of at the exposure I am,
right,
to show up with a level of integrity and commitment that's challenges me every day.
right. No, I've seen you being challenged in one interview. I couldn't even I didn't I didn't watch I didn't even watch all of it. I couldn't even, and I think you may know what I'm referring to. The cows.
The cows, yeah,
Cows.
that was
I
really early on.
That was, yeah, it was really early on, and it caught you for a loop. Yeah, I couldn't even, I didn't even listen to the whole thing. I was like, man, that's because
Yeah,
I don't agree with
he's
everything that person says or whatnot. But yeah. But we
well,
won't.
that's somebody who believes in
Have you ever spoken to that person after that? No, not really. Oh, okay.
now I mean there's I try to put my energy
Yeah.
into initiatives and relationships
Right.
where I'm valued and wanted.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I listened hard to I listened and thought about what his critiques were. I
Yeah.
never dismiss a critique.
Right. I didn't listen to the whole thing, but I listened to about half of it or whatnot. And yeah.
He that white people can't be possibly have any role in this. So
Right. 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 Well, me personally, I think that we should just have more ownership and ownership of it in leadership positions. 2021, so I believe it all depends on the approach, because sometimes groups will just reach out to people of color and just want them to join up in their group. And I mean, with no type of dialogue or communication, and it's like a transaction. That's not the way sometimes they see it is. And I was witness to that. It happened to me over here. So I'm leery of that.
I'm saying that's for me. When I hear that, I'm thinking the word tokenize.
Yeah, yeah.
I need
No, but there was a group that reached out and was like, "Hey, it's will you check us out or whatever?" And I checked. I said, "Yeah, give me some time. I'll check you out." And then they said, "Yeah, will that be your account number, or will it basically be your credit card, or how will you pay to join this
Oh,
as a membership of this anti-racist group?" That's and I'm like, well, can I said I'll get back to you. If I do, maybe I'll do it by like a credit card or online transaction. And then and then the person was like, the next thing was like, well, it's better to be together rather than by yourself. And I was like, yeah. And so it was like, I don't know if the person was actually, you know they sent me a message initially, so I was like, I don't know if the person's listening to me. Like, like, I see it as a field of opportunists in some ways. And so that's why I talk about it, and I kind of ask you um your thoughts on that. But then again, yeah. Right.
Well, I think, like, I don't know if that's a white person, but if that's a
Yep.
white,
Of course.
the typical white reaction will be, you don't appreciate what I'm doing.
Yeah.
That's that sense of entitlement. And so a more awakened, evolved anti-racist mindset or racial justice mindset would be, wow, there's something I'm not seeing. I have
Yeah.
something to learn from this person.
I'm glad you mentioned that, and that's what I'm realizing. That a lot of them need to see. I see certain groups doing that, but I think a lot of these people in these groups, and they're gonna listen to this video, or if they're not listening now, they're I'm not saying they're dinosaurs, but that's the way of doing it of old. Because I mean, they, like you said, they need to have this new anti-racist mindset because his, yeah, like you said, his response was like, well, your choice, you know what I mean? And all I mentioned was that I'll check it out, and that makes me want to start my own little thing, you know what I mean? Because all I talk about is, of course, in 2021 I want to see more, obviously more black faces, or people of color, period, in leadership or ownership positions, and not, you know yeah, because
And
otherwise, I'm looking back and I'm like, okay, so we have a history of that going on. So what really has changed? You try to gauge and see what wasn't working, and so maybe we need to try something different. I mean, I don't, for the life of me, I don't understand why a lot of these groups that see that there's no substantial, I don't know, they might have been substantial growth in their numbers or membership, but when you look at the world, you kind of see, okay, what has it done? So maybe we should change our approach. I don't know.
well,
Uh,
one of
or
my thoughts is,
structure or whatever. I don't know.
if there isn't impact that improves the quality of material and financial life for people of color in your community, then you have to ask what is anything changing? That's the measure. And the only people who get to tell us white people how well we're doing in our anti-racism efforts are people of color.
Right. Right.
I'm not feeling it. I don't feel racism personally. I can witness it outside myself.
Right.
I can never measure how well we're doing in the United States. I have to hear that from people of color who are living it. The other thing I think is worth saying is that anti-racism work is relationship work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
a lot of the skills that we have for these, I'm going to go back to your word, utopian,
Yeah.
these homogeneous cultures that we're a part of,
Right.
those skills don't translate because those skills don't go deep, don't deal with conflict. If you don't deal with, if I was taught not to rock the boat. If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything. Also, guess what? I come out of childhood with no ability. I have no skills, and I don't have the emotional stamina to navigate emotional conflict. So, the beautiful thing about leaning hard into anti-racism work is that it develops its basic human development. We reclaim a lot of our basic human development that got truncated by being taught to.
Right. Yeah. And there you go. You talk about how it destroys. It just being racist. It destroys the human race, basically. Yeah.
Yep,
Well, anyway, was there anything else that you got going on there? We're gonna end this because we've been here for over an hour.
no, I
Um,
think there's a couple people
you
I
want to
think
take your time too much?
enjoy talking to. We can do that offline. I'd love to give you some names of people to contact if you want to keep doing this.
Yeah,
Um,
we'll see. We'll
so
see. Yeah,
I
yeah,
really
of course.
appreciate you inviting me in, and I just wish we could have been that. Always wanted to go to Norway, never been.
Yeah, yeah. You definitely have to.
Someday I'll get there.
Yeah, yeah. You definitely will. You definitely. Yeah, yeah. I would like to. Yeah, see if that could happen in the future, and uh, maybe you hold a talk or something like that. Maybe I would love if you could bring Robin D'Angelo as well, y'all too. I don't know how close you guys are.
You're
Uh,
very close. So,
okay. Yeah,
uh,
yeah, yeah.
you know,
Like
I,
a, yeah,
I love what you're doing.
yeah.
one of the people I'm thinking of, if you were interested, and I don't know if she would be, but I'll just mention her name. There's somebody in the state of Maine called Black Girl in Maine.
Okay.
You know, as she moved to Maine from Chicago, her husband got a job, and she sort of woke up her first morning. She's like, "Where is everybody? Like everyone's white. What's going on in the state?" State of Maine is
Well, especially like Maine and Vermont and all those. Yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah.
she started writing
Wow.
a Black Girl in Maine, and it's expanded into this whole movement. But you know, if you go to her website, you'll see it's.
Yeah.
What reminds me is that she's a Black woman who's just speaking up in this super white space
There you
and
go. Yeah.
doing too.
Right.
And
Right.
so I could imagine that the two of you.
Look, yeah, don't get me wrong. There's other people out here speaking up. You know, a lot of continental African, refugees and some not refugees, but yeah, a lot of continental Africans. And there's just a very small segment for us African Americans. Me and I can probably name probably a couple of people, maybe one person that I know, a couple of people, and some doing their work in different ways, but definitely not where we don't have that many doing that. But yeah, I appreciate that, and I've definitely written it down, and I will Google her. Yeah,
Good to be connected. Thank you so much
yeah.
for.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
I'll be following you.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, and we'll continue following you. All right. Bye bye. All right. Let me see.